This is House Planning Help episode 203. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up in this session, my guest is self-builder, craftsman and blogger Will Anderson. He managed to build a house in central London. That's not easy. And then a few years later, he did it all again right next door. So quite an interesting story to uncover, because this is then a semi-detached house, and that means there are party wall agreements that need to go in place. There's also a learning journey, because he's built a house once and then he's done it all again. So he's eco-learning, he's simplified a lot of things. We'll hear about that. And he's drawn influence from the arts and crafts movement. Can't wait to find out how that all fits into today's episode. I must thank Robin, who's one of our team here at House Planning Help. He puts a lot of the show notes together, but he's a big fan of Will's. So he prepped me up and made sure I knew all of the interesting stuff. And hopefully, Robin, this is one for you as well. You'll enjoy this. So when we interview self-builders, we quite often mention, look, they've written a blog. It's worth going to check out. Well, this one really is, and it takes it up a notch because Will, his day job is writing. So he's a great writer from the start. He actually writes in a completely different industry, but you can see how he's got a passion for this. And so it really comes out along with the outstanding photos, which just scream craft as you get towards the latter end of the project. So let's have a chat with Will then. I asked him how this all got started.
Okay, so the whole story began a very long time ago. Well, I'd say around 2000, when I first came across the site next door, which had a very big tree on it. And I took the opportunity to realize my dream, which was to self-build. And I was completely amazed that we were able to do it in London. But we snapped up the plot, and we decided to do the very best we could for that plot, which meant for me at that time, building a house that was not only wonderful to live in, but had the very best ecological performance. And we were inspired by the tree, which, we wanted to build a house that worked like a tree, hence tree house. So we set a very, very high set of goals for it, ecologically, environmentally.
Why?
That's what I wanted to achieve. It just seemed like the right thing to do, that we had this extraordinary opportunity, and I wanted to make the very best of it. I was also very committed to those kind of goals personally. But also it seemed to me that, it was a win-win situation, that if you built a house that had the very best environmental performance, it would also hopefully be the very best for you. It'd have incredibly low bills, be very comfortable, be warm, all those kinds of things. There are, of course, potentially costs involved, and there were some costs. But in the scheme of things, when you're building an entire house from scratch, there are a lot of costs to think about, and it seemed to me to make sense to factor in some of those additional costs in the knowledge that in the longer term you'd make some significant savings. So it was a big vision. It was ridiculously ambitious, frankly, looking back.
And was it a terraced house, really, you were designing? Did you go into it like that?
So it was treehouse was a detached house, but we knew always that there was going to be a plot next door and somebody would build next door. So we knew that in the long term there would be a house next door, and treehouse would become semi-detached, and indeed in the longer term as part of a terrace, which is what has been slowly been built around it. So we always knew that somebody was going to build next door, and I always had it in the back of my mind that somebody might well be me.
If you'd put windows on this elevation here, would that have actually blocked someone, or just meant that something awkward would pop up next door?
Yeah, if we'd put windows on the northern elevation, which is where the new house has been built, we would have made life extremely difficult for anybody who bought the land. So it was strategically sensible to ensure that the entire north elevation was not going to compromise anyone's ability to build next door. Our neighbours, obviously, who owned the land, were very glad of that. But also it meant, in the long term, that I was able to have the opportunity to do it all over again.
And this was at the back of your mind as you go through it. So take us through some of the design challenges on Treehouse and how it went forwards?
Okay, so Treehouse was the first house. The second house is called the Orchard. The Treehouse we started on site in 2004, and at that time, that was before the whole kind of passive house movement had really happened in the UK. Bizarrely, actually, I had taken an interest in it during my kind of research while we were designing Treehouse. I mean, I worked with a great architect, Peter Smithdale of Constructive Individuals. He was very up for the crazy ambitions that we had for Treehouse. And I showed him some of the passive house stuff, and he was kind of interested. But again, nobody really knew about it here. It was all a bit challenging. Nobody had built anything like that here. I even had an email conversation with Wolfgang Feist, who's the guy who runs the institute in Germany. But we didn't end up going down that route just because nobody had done it here. It was all a bit too challenging. And even delivering what we wanted to deliver, we had to look far and wide to work out what to do. We ended up using a timber frame approach with detailing using Canadian standards of air tightness. So we had to really make it up as we go along, as we went along to some extent in building Treehouse. But, we set this incredibly ambitious goal of being energy self-sufficient to zero carbon, which we did achieve by combining a very strong fabric-first approach with quite a lot of technology, which we were able to do. So, a big solar array on the roof, PV solar array, plus a ground source heat pump, plus a hot water panel too. So it was quite a high-tech, high-performance house in every way. But we got there.
How did the technology perform? So, say, for example, the ground source heat pump, I can look out and see you haven't got much space.
Yeah, so the ground source heat pump, which was supplied by ICE Energy, has always worked very well. Our neighbours who now own the house have had no problems with it. It's been, I suppose, one of the nice things about heat pumps is they do just tend to chug along. They're quite simple bits of technology compared to boilers. Because we don't have an enormous amount of land, we had to go down rather than across. So we sank some boreholes, and so all that went in at the very beginning of the process in building Treehouse. But yeah, it worked well. It was a warm house, it still is, and we never had any significant problems with it at all. So it's a good technology, it's a tried and tested technology. But when we came to build the new house, the Orchard next door, I wanted to cross out some of that technology. I wanted to design it in such a way that we didn't need it.
Maybe the question should then be, what did you learn from building a first time?
Oh, what did I learn? Lots.
Okay, maybe that's a bit of a tall order
no,
question.
It's okay. One thing I learned was that the second time around, I really wanted to do it myself. I mean, that was partly because I had a difficult relationship with our contractor, and that was tough. And, hopefully in most cases that wouldn't happen. But I had a real desire to get my hands dirty the second time round. I did next door when we were building towards the end. But the second time round, it was very much more self-built. And that's, it's more challenging to do that. I did an awful lot of courses. I learned an awful lot of trades to do that. But that was enormously rewarding in terms of what we achieved. But in design terms, I suppose what I wanted to achieve the second time round was something simpler, something which was less high-tech, but still achieved a really kind of comfortable indoor environment. And that basically meant going down the passive house route much more intently, and that was possible the second time round. The whole kind of design had arrived in this country, the supply chain was there, the company who put up the house knew all about it. So we could build a house which was much, much warmer in fabric terms, and then we could cut out the heating system, basically.
You mentioned timber frame on Treehouse, but you had a timber frame on this too. So how did it differ, and what changed in the specification?
Yeah, that's a good question. The timber frames are actually very similar. They're both I-beam timber frames. So the studs in the walls are all I-beams, so you have this very thin coal bridge across the studs because of the sheet of OSB in the I-beam. So in a way, they looked quite similar, but actually the design was different. The house next door, Treehouse, detailing the air tightness was a real problem. That's what people didn't really know about. And we had to have a whole kind of interior plastic wrap, if you like, which provided the kind of air tightness. In this house, it's much simpler again. We used a design which, Touchwood homes have specialised in this country, where the airtight layer is actually on the outside, and they use this system where the sheathing boards actually interlock and you glue them together so that the entire outside sheathing of the house is airtight, and they're extremely good at doing that well. So we were able to lose some of the complexity of the plastic wrap on the inside and achieve something which I think is much more robust in terms of airtightness than the house next door, although the house next door I think works pretty well. This one was easier to build and it's a simpler design, and it means that you don't have to worry so much about what you do on the inside of the house in terms of drilling holes and putting surfaces in. You can do all that and not compromise the airtightness.
What I like is there's so much character here, and I think it's worth pointing out some elements that are outside the thermal envelope.
Yes, so the floor area of the heated part of the house is 100 square metres, but we also have two very important spaces outside that, which are right at the front of the house. On the ground floor, there's a porch, which of course has always been a key feature of eco house design, the idea of having a kind of barbican to protect you from bringing lots of cold air in whenever you open the front door. So it's an intermediary space between the outside and the inside, where you can take all your clothes off and your boots off and close the front door before opening the interior front door. But it's also a great larder. It's a great place for storing food. It stays very cool. It's built with a traditional solid brick wall. The space above it is a conservatory, which is built, again, using very traditional materials. It's a solid oak frame with lots of leaded windows, all of which I made myself. So incredibly old-fashioned design. But because it's not a heated space, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how well ventilated and how much heat comes in and out of it. In fact, it's a wonderful space in the spring and summer months. It gets very warm indeed. So it's great having these spaces outside the envelope where you can do things where the heating doesn't matter because you're not heating it.
Let's talk through some of those skills that you picked up, and I'm interested to see a workbench right in front of us, so obviously ongoing. What did you learn and why?
Yeah, so the workbench I actually made myself. I did a course in Yorkshire, make your own bench. And I suppose I originally anticipated that bench would get sold, but in fact it's become part of the household, part of the main room. And stained glass is currently being made on it. So yeah, I had this. The house is inspired by the arts and crafts movement. So I was very interested in the arts and crafts movement. I love the houses of the arts and crafts architects, and have been to many of them. So I'm just inspired by their approach, the handcrafted approach, the delight in materials, and in a kind of clean but very rich design. So we tried to pursue that approach here, and that for me meant developing many of those kind of craft skills myself. So I became a cabinet maker, first of all, trained to be a cabinet maker in Kent, built the kitchen long before we started building the house, but also developed skills in joinery, in plastering, in stained glass making, even in making ceramics. So we've even made tiles from the clay which we took out of the ground when we were digging the foundations to complete some of the details in the house. So it's been a real labour of love in that respect. So much of the house is really handmade by us. It's been a long project as a result. We've taken a long time over it, but, we're going to be here forever, so that's okay.
How did you find those courses? What were your criteria?
It sometimes is hard to find the right course, and I've had a few hits and misses, but I did do quite a few courses at a place called the Building Training Centre in Croydon, and that just was reasonably nearby, and they did a wide range of courses. So I did things like joinery and bricklaying and plastering there. But for the more detailed stuff, particularly the cabinet making, that was a more sustained bit of training, and I had to go to a special workshop. I actually couldn't find a place in London for that. I ended up working in Kent to do that, but with a guy who was just very supportive and very helpful in letting me basically go off-piste and do the stuff I wanted to do very early on. But also, the stained glass was at the Working Men's College in North London. You just have to explore what's local to you and try them out. It's always a bit hit and miss.
How much of it did you know up front, and how much did you craft as you went along?
Pretty much all the latter. I mean, I didn't really have any craft skills to speak of at the beginning.
Was it a case of you get the shell in and then you start ad-libbing a little bit, or was there a bit more tactics to windows? And
it was a bit more planned than that. So, for example, we have this very tall staircase window which stretches over 2 floors. It's a triple glazed window, but it's finished on the inside with an extra layer which is all stained glass. So it's a very big stained glass design, and that was always part of the original design. So at the design stage, I was already thinking about how we could incorporate these kind of craft aspects. And there's so all sorts of details like that. And the kitchen, obviously, the kitchen was it's an open plan kitchen in the main living space. That had to be designed as part of the design for the building to work it out how exactly it would fit in. So I was thinking about the design of all these things early on. And strange moving between design and doing some courses and then actually starting on site and trying to keep all of that going at the same time. It's tricky to do that, I have to say.
What happened when you got stuck? I'm sure it was inevitable that happened a few times.
Well, yeah. I mean, I didn't build the entire house by myself and got help from various places at various times. The very, very first thing I built was a wall at the end of our garden which separates the land from the adjoining house. It's a very gorgeous brick wall made with reclaimed bricks, 2 different kinds of bricks. It's quite a high wall. It's a 2-metre high wall. I did a bricklaying course and started building that. And I got to about course 10 and thought, I'm not sure if I'm going to get to 2 meters and this is going to be okay. Just because I had, it was my very first bit of bricklaying. I was being a bit ambitious. So I did get some help in at that point with a builder who'd helped build Treehouse next door. He was an experienced brickie, so I became his muck maker while he carried on going. So there are times when you have to get help. You need to know your limits, obviously.
You've done that a couple of times too with Touchwood. When they were here, you joined in. So how easy is that to do?
Yeah, not easy. I mean, if you have a contractor subcontractor who comes in to do a piece of work, usually they want to do it all on their own terms. But I mean, Touchwood are just a very great company, and they just were very happy. Given that I did have a bit of experience for me to muck in, obviously they ran the show, told me what to do. But it was great. The timber frame went up on in the middle of the summer. It was gorgeous, long, sunny days, and so it was a great to work with them putting it up. But I had the same discussion with the brickies, and they said, "Oh no, we'll do it ourselves. Thank you very much."
Attitude difference between carpenters.
Well, I think it was. I mean, it was reasonable. I could have helped the brickies mixing the muck and shifting things around, but they had someone they wanted to do that. So, all right, fair enough.
Were there any issues in actually continuing this semi-detached property? This wall here, did it all just come out okay? I'm trying to think structurally how that works.
It was challenging. It was a bit tricky because basically what we have here is, so the neighbouring house, which we built first, had a timber frame wall, an I-beam timber frame wall finished with a render board and a ventilation cavity and all that business. And then we're building another timber frame wall up against it. And what we had to do is we had to take the render board off. We had to build another timber frame wall in front of the other wall, which we then had to fill with insulation. But also we had to make sure that although we were building this new wall next to the existing wall, and they're both 2 timber frame walls, it's very important that they weren't attached in any way, that there are some metal ties at the very top of the building, but we didn't want any ties between the walls anywhere else in order to ensure there was acoustic isolation. So it was a tricky thing to do well, but it does mean that we've got 2 very well insulated walls there without any acoustic breaks. So it worked out fine.
And were you able to live next door while you were building, or did you have to move out?
No, we had to sell next door in order to buy the land and raise the money to build. So we lived in a rat-infested hovel in Forest Hill for about 3 years.
Maybe while we've touched on the land, you can tell me about both sides. So the first plot that you got for Treehouse, were you approaching the owner of the house opposite, or how did that work? And also, how did you get through the negotiation on the next one?
So when we bought the land for Treehouse, that was just on the market. It was in a local estate agent. A bit remarkable, really. That doesn't happen very, very often, especially in Clapham. So we were very lucky to find that. But the second time round, we knew our neighbours. I mean, we knew the people who owned the land, which was one day going to become a building plot.
How? Because they're on the opposite street, aren't they?
Yeah, so the plots in which we've built are all effectively the ends of very long gardens from one road, which come down to another road. It's typical gardens with road frontages, which are almost always been built on these days, but these ones, for whatever reason, hadn't been built on. So we knew that one day it would come up. So, we just asked our neighbours to ensure that we had first option when they decided to sell the land, which was what effectively happened. It was always there in the back of my mind that one day we'd do it again. Happily, we had about 8 years in Treehouse, which was an absolutely lovely house to live in, before they decided to sell. So at the time, when the time came that they wanted to sell the land, I was kind of in a position where I was enthusiastic to do it all over again, and so enthusiastic that I wanted to do it, very much with my own fair hands, which is what happened.
How did you set a price then for the piece of land?
Through a tricky negotiation.
Any tips?
Well, I mean, the price I agreed with our neighbours was based on the price which I had paid for the land next door, which was on the open market, albeit 10 years earlier. So we paid a bit more, obviously. But, we were fortunate in some ways that we bought before London went a little crazy. But even so, I guess we sold before that happened too. So it's all swings and roundabouts, isn't it?
All relevant. And am I right in saying that on the first building, you negotiated with the contractor? So how did that turn out versus what you did with getting a timber frame shell in here?
Yeah, the first house was built through a contractor. I have to say that wasn't a great experience.
But that wasn't part of the negotiation, that it was just how things played out, or was the negotiation a contributing factor?
No, the negotiation was okay. It was just the reality of working with somebody who wasn't a great communicator for quite a long period of time. It took a long time to build. He didn't have many men on site. And it was a difficult relationship. So second time round, I was very keen to do it myself. That's part of the reason I wanted to do it myself, as well as just feeling more confident about doing that. And as I say, wanting to be very involved in the details of how it was built. In fact, that worked out very well. I mean, lots of people will say, "Oh, you mustn't try and do that if you have no experience." But actually, it ain't so hard to build a house on your own if you get the right support, the right people to do the right jobs.
And you have to be patient and determined.
Patience is everything, yes. Patience.
I'm sensing that about you. So, things just tick along, do they? Yeah.
Well, patience is a very, very important quality to have if you're self-building. And also you need to understand how the building industry works. I think people, there's classic stories about people trying to get builders to do stuff and they don't turn up on the right day or whatever, and people get very frustrated by that. But actually, you need to understand that in the building industry, that's absolutely standard, not because builders are unreliable, but because people's timetables and schedules are always shifting. People never know when something's going to start or finish. Well, people never know when something's going to finish, so they never know when something's going to start. So you have to be very flexible. You can't assume that if people say they're going to start on X day, they're definitely going to start on X day. And you mustn't jump up and down and tear your hair if they don't. Because the last job they were on overran, and they can't just walk away. You're going to be pretty annoyed if they walk away from you before the job's finished, which, of course, is another thing people get irate about. So there's a kind of ethos of being flexible, working around other people's needs as well as your own, and not getting too upset if things don't go exactly to plan. You need to expect them not to go to plan, and you need to have a kind of flexibility built into the project. And try and understand things from other people's perspectives and the kind of issues they're dealing with too. Which isn't to say, that there aren't cowboys out there who'll mess you around. Happily, none of those people arrived on this site. All the people we worked with were great, really great.
What was the biggest challenge?
Well, it took us a long time to get planning permission. The design took a long time to get right because the complications of where we are. But actually, when we were actually building, there's always an issue about getting out of the ground. And actually, we had some very good ground workers, so that was all let as one contract. A lot of concrete got poured, and we had to pile the foundations and building where we are up against another house and having to take part of their wall off, and doing all that was tricky. And we also had unfortunately, the neighbours on the other side were less than supportive, and we had a very difficult party wall agreement. That was really, really hard work, actually, because they picked up on us over absolutely every little detail, every foot we put wrong. They were down on us like a ton of bricks, and that was a bit exhausting. So again, you need kind of certain resilience and patience and determination when you're up against those kinds of problems, because they're not going to go away. You just have to see them through, which indeed I did.
And that party wall agreement is because you're within 3 meters of the neighbouring property, and it's easier, obviously, on that side because that used to be your property. So how does that negotiation work?
Well, it's all about party wall surveyors, and if you have to have a party wall agreement, you need a really good person on your side drawing up the party wall agreement. We did have a good guy, but then nonetheless there were problems with the party wall award, which led to conflict. And just pay attention to the detail at that stage. When the party wall award is being drawn up, pay attention to the detail. Really don't just assume it'll all be fine. Don't assume that your happy neighbours will stay happy neighbours. They may not once the scaffolding goes up and their garden gets crushed or whatever else happens. So you need to just make sure you are properly protected.
Just a couple more things then. This obviously has a high performance thermal envelope. You've chosen not to include MVHR. So why?
Well, we wanted to have a passive house rather than a passive house. So we wanted this house to be as passive as possible. So not only having minimal active heating, but also we didn't really want to have mechanical ventilation, which is always the issue with the passive house spec. You have to have mechanical ventilation because the airtight frame is so tight, you need to have a controlled ventilation. Well, we do have heat recovery ventilation, but it's a passive system called Ventive, which has been quite widely tried and tested now, and we find works very well. It basically means we've got the 3 main living spaces. You've got a natural ventilation system driven both by wind on the cowls on the roof and by the buoyancy of the exiting air. So, and there's a heat exchanger in the cowls at the top, so you do get some heat recovery. And, although you don't get as kind of stable a background ventilation as you would with a mechanical system, actually it works perfectly well most of the time. And if there is any time when you feel the air quality is a bit stuffy, you can just open a window for a bit, you're not leave massive amounts of heat. So, yeah, I'm very pleased with that. It's worked really well. It means that we've got a completely draft-free, stable interior temperature, but we still have good air quality without having all the business of mechanical ventilation. So I'm very pleased with the Ventive system.
And I don't think you mentioned this, but you had mechanical ventilation in the last house.
Yeah, we did. I was never convinced it worked terribly well. I mean, these things often aren't installed very well. I don't suppose ours was installed brilliantly. They've got to be set up well. And even when they're set up well, I'm not sure how well they really work in terms of moving the air around. And also, it's just a big whirring box in the cupboard. And if you can get rid of that big whirring box with a passive system, then it seems like a good idea to me.
You've also reclaimed quite a few items in and around. I'm just trying to dig into more of those eco-credentials. So anything you want to tell me about?
Well, yeah, we've used quite a bit of reclaimed materials. All the floors, they were a real labour of love. Every floor in this house is reclaimed parquet. And we've used a different wood and a different pattern in each room. And I can't tell you how long that took and how much effort that was, but it was extraordinary.
So how do you do it? You get the reclaimed material, then what?
Well, you have to clean it up a bit. So you get all these blocks. I mean, we just have these huge, huge heaps of dirty old reclaimed parquet blocks. And yeah, then you have to set it out properly, and which usually means setting out a long spine down the middle of a room, and then you build out from the spine. And you can use these great glues now, which kind of recharge the bitumen, so you don't have to take the bitumen off. The glues kind of recharge it. So the glues are good. Nonetheless, you have to be really careful, because if you go out a bit, the whole thing starts to go slightly wonky, then you're really in trouble. So you have to really, especially in a big room, you have to be really careful, or else you end up with all sorts of problems and having to cut blocks in order to fit them in. So, yeah, huge job. And then, of course, once they're all laid, you have to sand everything down to take all the old gunk and all stuff off the old blocks. You sand it down to a new surface, and then you oil it. So massive, massive amount of work that was. But, absolutely love it. We've got these beautiful old African, Australian and other Asian woods, which you would never get today, certainly not sustainably. And, they're just such a pleasure to live with. So I would recommend it, although it is a lot of work. We did actually put down some parquet floors in Treehouse. Again, reclaimed parquet floors, and I said never again. And then here we are with an entire house finished in parquet.
Tell me a little bit about the garden, your vision for it, and how long it's taken to get to this stage.
So the house is called The Orchard, and that's because I wanted to build a house which sustained as much fruit as possible, ideally enough to keep us going with some kind of fruit all the way year round. So we have a small front garden which is quite densely planted with little apple and pear trees, kind of vertical cordons principally, so that you can get quite a lot of different varieties in a small space. The back garden, although it's only 10 metres long by 6 metres wide, is very densely planted with stone fruits and soft fruit in particular. So lots of blackberries, blackcurrants, plums, greengages, apricots, cherries, gooseberries, you name it, it's all out there. So that was very much part of the vision for the house, was to have all this space. We also have this first floor conservatory where we can grow more tender fruit. And what I did actually, at the very beginning of the project, before we started building, because the nature of the plot on this tight urban site, we knew that once the house was up, we would never be able to get any significant machinery to the back of the house unless it came through the house. So because the soil was so poor, when we were clearing the site, I actually had a digger and a dumper on site. I actually just got rid of a lot of it and replaced the area which I knew we would be planting with some really good quality muck, and that's really paid off.
Finally then, I think I'd just like to know, you've done this once, you've built next door. How do you think you've done ecologically, and are you fulfilled, or do you think this will eventually lead to something else?
I am fulfilled, sir. It's not going to happen again. No, this house in particular has been such a labour of love. The design is so much what we wanted. It's so kind of honed to our needs and to what works for us. I cannot imagine building a house which we would be happier in than this house. It is although it's a small house, it's an absolute delight for us to live in. And given how much of us is in it, all the stained glass, all the cabinets, all the details, all the floors, all the ceramics, all these things which have gone into the building, walking away from that would be very hard indeed. So, one day there is still another plot next to us. One day that'll get built on. If we build on it, it won't be for ourselves. So it is possible I might do it again. It wouldn't be for us. It would be for somebody else. I hope somebody else who is as crazy, as ambitious as I, buys the land in due time.
Well, never say never.
Yes,
well, it's been fascinating to have a look around and get to meet you. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Get more in the show notes, houseplanninghelp.com/203. You can review all the main information. We've made a summary for you and added in some photos. Of course, links across to Will's blog, which you must have a look at, houseplanninghelp.com/203. Let's finish up today with a quick update on my own project, because things really feel like they're accelerating forwards at the moment. You know probably that we've been filming on site for a while, and we're going to make this our third case study in the hub. But as I've been going through this, I thought there is a certain amount of footage that perhaps isn't right for our in-depth video case studies. We try and make this all about learning and why we make certain decisions. And being my own project, I'm going to try and share absolutely everything with you. But there are certain things that I feel and want to report to you at the same time. And I've decided I'm going to take the bold step of releasing a vlog. And that means every week or so, I'll put together just a short episode, might be 5 to 10 minutes, just a few of my thoughts of what's happening on site. We'll try and make it really fun. And then that will go on the House Planning Help YouTube channel. So if you're not one of our subscribers, subscribe now and you'll be notified immediately when new episodes go live. So that's an extra fun thing to tell you about. Some more work at this end. If you want to come and join us in the hub, we'd love you in there. In fact, I'm just about to send out a survey to all of our current members to find out how we can make it better. What do they want in there? And then we're on an ongoing mission to try and simplify that self-build journey. If you're building an eco home, this is the place for you. houseplanninghelp.com/join. Find out more. Next time I visit a custom build street in the heart of a developer estate. What exactly is it like to live there? Could you perhaps be overlooking plots just because you're thinking, I don't want to be on a developer estate? Well, we chat to 3 sets of neighbours, and I have to say, this street is fantastic. It's amazing how well when everyone just builds what they want to and it just comes together and works really, really well. So we'll be doing that next time. Thanks for listening. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.